Imagine you're in a room, asked to push a button that delivers a shock to a person on the other side of a wall. With each press, the shock intensifies. You hear their screams, their pleas for you to stop. But an authority figure in a lab coat calmly tells you the experiment must continue. Would you keep pressing the button despite the suffering you're causing? This chilling scenario is at the heart of one of the most famous and controversial psychological studies ever conducted, the Milgram Experiment. In today's video, we'll uncover the surprising truth behind this experiment and explore what it reveals about human nature. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram set out to investigate a disturbing question. Why do ordinary people follow orders, even when those orders result in harm to others? This was shortly after World War II, and Milgram was deeply interested in understanding the role obedience played in the atrocities of the Holocaust. His experiment was deceptively simple. Participants were told they were part of a study on learning and memory. They were instructed to administer electric shocks to another participant, who was actually an actor, each time the learner made a mistake on a word pair task. The shocks weren't real, but the participants didn't know that. As the voltage increased, the actor would cry out in pain, beg for mercy, and eventually go silent, as if unconscious or worse. The real test was to see how far the participants would go. Would they obey the authority figure and continue delivering shocks, even when they believed they were causing serious harm? So, what happened? Milgram found that a staggering 65% of participants continued delivering shocks all the way to the maximum voltage of 450 volts, even though they could hear the learner screaming in pain, or had reason to believe they had seriously harmed them. What's more, many of these participants showed visible signs of stress and discomfort. Some were sweating, trembling, and even crying. Yet, when the authority figure, the experimenter in the lab coat, told them to continue, they did. These findings shocked the world. Again, pun intended. How could so many people be willing to follow orders, even when those orders conflicted with their personal morals? Milgram's experiment highlighted a powerful and often unsettling aspect of human behavior, our tendency to obey authority, even when it goes against our own ethical beliefs. But why does this happen? The experiment showed how deeply ingrained our respect for authority is. From a young age, we're taught to follow rules and listen to figures of authority, whether they're parents, teachers, or police officers. In the Milgram experiment, participants were more likely to obey because they believed the experimenter was a knowledgeable, trustworthy figure of authority. Another reason people obey is the diffusion of responsibility. When someone is following orders, they might feel like they're not personally responsible for the outcome. In Milgram's study, participants may have rationalized their actions by thinking, "I'm just doing what I'm told," which allowed them to disconnect from the consequences of their behavior. In the experiment, participants started with small, relatively harmless shocks and gradually increased the intensity. This gradual escalation made it easier for participants to justify their actions. After all, if they were willing to deliver a small shock, what's a slightly bigger one, and then a bigger one? This slippery slope effect made it hard for participants to stop once they had started. The Milgram experiment forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. Can obedience to authority override our personal sense of morality? Milgram believed that many people are capable of committing acts they would normally consider immoral, simply because they're following orders from someone in a position of authority. One of the most chilling aspects of the experiment is how ordinary people, teachers, accountants, factory workers, were willing to inflict pain simply because they were told to do so. This has important implications, not just for understanding past atrocities like the Holocaust, but for everyday situations where people might follow unethical orders, whether in the military, in the workplace, or even in school. The Milgram experiment helps explain why people sometimes engage in harmful behaviors under the influence of authority, but it's not just a thing of the past. There are countless real-world examples of this phenomenon in action. One of the most well-known examples is the defense of just following orders in military settings. History is filled with soldiers who've carried out horrific actions during wartime because they were told to do so by commanding officers. Milgram's experiment helps explain how people can override their moral instincts when they feel pressured by authority. The same principles apply in the corporate world. Think about situations where employees might feel pressured to engage in unethical practices, like falsifying data or cutting corners because their boss tells them to. In some cases, employees might go along with unethical decisions because they don't want to lose their job or face punishment from superiors. Even in schools, students may face pressure to conform to authority figures like teachers or administrators, even if those figures make decisions that feel wrong or unfair. The same dynamics of obedience can play out in classrooms where students might hesitate to question authority, even when they disagree with the actions being taken. So, what can we do to resist following harmful or unethical orders from authority figures? The Milgram Experiment shows us that obedience is a powerful force, but it's not unbreakable. Here are some ways to counteract it. It's important to remember that authority figures aren't always right. One of the best ways to resist unethical orders is to question authority when something doesn't feel right. Asking yourself, is this the right thing to do? Or, what are the consequences of this action? Can help break the automatic obedience response. One of the reasons people follow unethical orders is because they feel like they're not responsible for the outcome. To counter this, we need to take personal responsibility for our actions. Even if you're following orders, remember that you still have the power to make your own decisions and choose what you believe is right. Sometimes, all it takes is one person speaking up to break the cycle of obedience. If you find yourself in a situation where you're being asked to do something unethical, speaking up can encourage others to do the same. By standing up for what you believe in, you can create a ripple effect that helps others resist unethical orders too. Finally, building ethical awareness, both in ourselves and in society, is crucial. Understanding the psychological mechanisms behind obedience can help us recognize when we're being influenced by authority and empower us to make better, more ethical decisions. The Milgram Experiment may have been conducted over 60 years ago, but its lessons are still relevant today. It revealed a deep truth about human behavior, that under the right conditions, ordinary people can do extraordinary and sometimes horrifying things when instructed by authority. But it also gives us hope. By understanding the power of obedience and learning to question authority when necessary, we can become more conscious of our actions and more resistant to harmful orders. At the end of the day, it's up to each of us to decide when to follow orders and when to stand up for what's right. So, would you follow orders? Or would you choose to resist? The answer may not be as simple as you think.